Eric sat in the dimly lit corner of his favorite cafe, his laptop open but untouched. The steaming cup of coffee beside him had long gone cold. His mind, however, burned with thoughts too troubling to ignore. Samantha had been working late more often than not these days, her texts always bearing the same refrain: "Don't wait up, I'll grab dinner at the office." At first he believed her. After all, deadlines were a known beast in her line of work, and her ambition was one of the qualities he had admired most. But lately her words felt hollow. The vibrant spark in her voice during their conversations had dimmed, replaced by a detached monotone. Her warm hugs became fleeting touches, her kisses mechanical and brief. It wasn't just her demeanor. Patterns emerged that tugged at his ever-curious mind. The hurried way she ended calls when he walked into a room, the faint trace of an unfamiliar cologne lingering on her clothes, and the tension that filled the air when he asked simple questions about her day, all of it screamed at him to dig deeper. Yet, it was a chance discovery that solidified his growing fears. Eric remembered the moment vividly. Samantha had left her laptop at home, a rare oversight for someone as meticulous as her. He needed to check a calendar for a potential client meeting and thought nothing of opening her device. But when the browser window flicked open, the sight of her email app stole his breath. There were exchanges with her boss, Richard, laced with a familiarity that didn't belong in a professional setting. It wasn't the words per se. She referred to Richard as Rick, a name she had never used at home, but the tone, casual yet intimate, that gave him pause. Then he noticed the attachments: reservations for an upscale restaurant, tickets to a weekend exhibit at a gallery neither he nor Samantha had ever mentioned. Eric closed the laptop with deliberate care, the weight of what he found crashing down like a leaden blanket. He couldn't ignore it anymore. He needed the truth, even if it shattered the life they had built. That night, Samantha came home late, as expected. Eric sat at the dining table, a spreadsheet open on his tablet. She pecked him on the cheek as she breezed by, heading straight to the shower. She didn't ask about his day. Eric watched her retreating figure, a flood of emotions swirling within him. Love, yes, but also hurt, anger, and an unsettling resolve. Samantha might have thought she was a step ahead, but Eric had already begun piecing together her lies. Tomorrow, he told himself. Tomorrow he'd uncover the extent of her betrayal. The confrontation was coming, and he intended to be ready. Rick couldn't sleep. The house felt colder than usual, the weight of suspicion pressing down on him like a thick, suffocating fog. Samantha lay next to him, her breathing soft and steady, oblivious to the storm brewing in his mind. He stared at the ceiling, his thoughts racing. Every whispered conversation, every unexplained late night, every vague excuse, it all pointed to something he couldn't yet prove but felt in his bones. The next day, Eric devised a plan. He wouldn't confront Samantha, not yet. If there was one thing he had learned in his years of managing difficult negotiations at work, it was the power of evidence. Gut feelings might drive decisions, but proof sealed outcomes. That evening, Eric waited until Samantha left for another urgent meeting. This time she claimed there was a crisis in her department, and everyone needed to pitch in to meet a deadline. Her voice was tinged with just enough exasperation to sound believable. She grabbed her keys and kissed him lightly on the cheek. "Don't wait up," she said, her words as hollow as her smile. Eric waited until the sound of her car faded down the street. Then he went to her office. The laptop was password protected, but Eric knew Samantha well enough to guess her passcode. She was meticulous but predictable, a quality that had once reassured him in their marriage, but now worked to his advantage. As the desktop screen flickered to life, Eric's chest tightened. He was about to cross a line, one that might lead to truths he couldn't unsee. But he pushed forward, opening her email and scrolling through her correspondence. At first, there was nothing overtly suspicious, just the typical exchange of office chatter. Then he found it, a series of messages labeled dinner follow-up. The emails were between Samantha and Richard, her boss. They were careful, almost annoyingly so, avoiding language that could be incriminating. But beneath the surface of professionalism lay subtleties that Eric couldn't ignore. The use of phrases like "our time together" or "looking forward to another productive evening" made his stomach churn. One attachment caught his eye, a receipt for a suite at the Grand Arcadia Hotel, dated last Friday, the same night Samantha had claimed she was working late on a presentation. Eric's hands trembled as he delved deeper. A folder labeled Projects Miscellaneous held a treasure trove of confirmations, calendar invites, and even pictures. His eyes froze on one photo in particular. It was a candid shot of Samantha perched on the edge of a desk, wine glass in hand, her posture relaxed and inviting. Richard stood next to her, his hand casually resting on the desk, far too close for comfort. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when Eric checked Samantha's messaging app. Her private chat with Richard was riddled with subtle, coded exchanges. One message read, "Tonight's plan is perfect. Can't wait to see you." Another added, "The desk feels like ours now, doesn't it?" The evidence was damning. It wasn't just an affair, it was an insult, a slap in the face to everything Eric thought they had built together. As the reality set in, Eric closed the laptop and stared at the darkened screen. He felt a strange mix of heartbreak and clarity. The Samantha he had loved and supported for years was gone, replaced by someone who could look him in the eye every day and lie without hesitation. But Eric wasn't a man to wallow in self-pity. He was decisive, a quality that had earned him respect in his career and friendships. He had the evidence now, and his next steps were clear. This wasn't going to end with a quiet confrontation. Samantha and Richard had betrayed him in the most personal way, and Eric intended to make them face the consequences. He spent the rest of the evening preparing. He copied every incriminating file onto a secure flash drive, ensuring he had a backup in case Samantha tried to delete the evidence. He even printed the most damning emails, placing them in an envelope labeled simply for HR. As he shut down the laptop, a single thought echoed in his mind. This wasn't just about his marriage anymore. It was about justice, about making sure people like Samantha and Richard couldn't continue their deception unchecked. By the time Eric finally crawled into bed, Samantha was fast asleep, her face serene. It was almost comical, he thought, how peaceful she looked. But Eric wasn't fooled. Tomorrow, the facade would crumble, and Samantha would see the man she had underestimated. The drive to Samantha's office felt surreal, as though Eric were a spectator in his own life. The city lights blurred past his car windows, but his focus remained razor-sharp. His pulse was steady, his breathing calm, yet a storm churned inside him, a quiet, purposeful rage. He wasn't going there for a fight. No, he was going there for closure, for answers, and most importantly, for justice. When Eric arrived, the office building loomed above him, its sleek glass facade gleaming under the streetlights. He parked in the visitor's lot and stepped out, clutching the envelope filled with evidence. The weight of it in his hand was almost comforting. It was tangible proof of Samantha and Richard's betrayal, a shield against any attempt at denial. The receptionist at the front desk greeted him with a polite but curious smile. It was late, and visitors were uncommon at this hour. Eric returned her greeting with a nod, his tone calm as he said, "I'm here to see Samantha Reed. It's urgent." The receptionist hesitated, her gaze flicking to the clock. "She's still in the conference room. Shall I let her know you're here?" "No need," Eric replied evenly. "I'll find her." The elevator ride to the 10th floor felt like an eternity. When the doors finally slid open, Eric stepped out into the dimly lit hallway, his shoes clicking against the polished floor. The office was mostly empty, but faint laughter echoed from the direction of the conference room. He followed the sound, each step measured and deliberate. As he approached, the voices became clearer. Samantha's laughter rang out, light and carefree, followed by Richard's deeper, more confident tone. Eric stood just outside the room, his hand tightening around the envelope. He didn't hesitate. With a sharp push, he opened the door. The scene inside was exactly as he had imagined. Samantha sat perched on the edge of the conference table, her legs crossed, a glass of red wine in her hand. Richard leaned casually against the table beside her, his tie loosened and his expression smug. The room reeked of intimacy, the kind that had no place between colleagues. Both froze as Eric stepped inside. Samantha's eyes widened, her smile faltering. "Eric," she stammered, sliding off the table, "what are you doing here?" Eric didn't respond immediately. He let the silence stretch, his gaze moving between the two of them. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, almost detached. "I came to see what working late really looks like." Richard straightened, his composure faltering for the first time. "Eric, this isn't what it looks like," he began, but Eric cut him off with a sharp laugh. "Spare me the clichés," Eric said, tossing the envelope onto the table between them. "I've seen enough to know exactly what it looks like." Samantha's face drained of color as she reached for the envelope, her hands trembling. She flipped through the contents, printed emails, hotel receipts, and photos that left no room for interpretation. Richard leaned over to look, his expression darkening with every page. "You went through my things?" Samantha asked, her voice a mix of outrage and desperation. "I did," Eric replied without flinching, "and I found out exactly who you are. A liar, a cheat, and someone who thought they could have it all without consequences." Samantha opened her mouth to respond, but Eric raised a hand to stop her. "Don't bother. I'm not here for your excuses. I'm here to make sure you understand that this," he gestured between her and Richard, "ends now." Richard cleared his throat, attempting to regain control of the situation. "Look, Eric, let's not blow this out of proportion. These things happen. It's unfortunate, but—" Eric's gaze snapped to him, cold and unyielding. "Unfortunate? That's the word you're going with? You've not only betrayed your position as her boss, but also as a professional. Do you think HR is going to shrug this off as an unfortunate situation?" Richard's face paled at the mention of HR, and he glanced nervously at Samantha. "Eric, we can handle this privately. No need to escalate things." Eric took a step closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Oh, it's already escalated. I filed a formal report with your company's compliance department. Every piece of evidence is now in their hands. By morning, everyone in this office will know exactly who you are and what you've done." Samantha's eyes filled with tears, but Eric remained unmoved. "Eric, please," she whispered. "We can fix this. It doesn't have to end this way." Eric shook his head, his expression hard. "You made your choice, Samantha. Every lie, every late night, every betrayal, you chose this path. And now you'll face the consequences." He turned on his heel, heading for the door, but paused just before leaving. "Without looking back," he said, "you'll hear from my lawyer in the morning." The drive home was eerily quiet. Eric's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his emotions a tangled mess of anger, heartbreak, and an unexpected sense of relief. The confrontation was over, and while it had left him shaken, it also marked the beginning of his freedom. As he pulled into his driveway, he took a deep breath, the cool night air filling his lungs. He wasn't sure what the future held, but one thing was certain: he was done living in the shadow of Samantha's lies. Inside the house, the silence felt different now, no longer oppressive but peaceful. Eric sat on the edge of the couch, staring at the empty space where his wife had once sat, weaving her web of deceit. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to exhale fully. Tomorrow would be the start of something new, and for that he was ready. By the next morning, the office buzzed with murmurs of the scandal that had broken overnight. Eric's meticulously gathered evidence had made its way to the company's human resources and compliance departments, ensuring that Samantha and Richard's actions couldn't be ignored. The once confident duo now found themselves at the center of a maelstrom, the consequences of their betrayal unraveling faster than they could react. Richard was the first to feel the sting. The head of HR, a stern woman named Claire, summoned him into her office before he had even finished his morning coffee. The air was charged with tension as he stepped inside, his usual swagger noticeably absent. Claire wasted no time, sliding the folder of evidence across the desk. "Explain this," she demanded, her voice clipped. Richard fumbled with the papers, his face reddening as he realized the depth of the allegations. This is a misunderstanding," he stammered. "Eric is trying to destroy me because he's angry about his wife." Claire's gaze didn't waver. "This isn't about Eric's motives. This is about your conduct. These emails, the hotel receipts, the photographs, this is a gross violation of our company's code of ethics." Richard's protests grew weaker as Claire outlined the company's immediate actions: suspension pending a formal investigation, the revocation of certain executive privileges, and a public statement addressing the scandal. By the time he left her office, his career was in free fall, and the veneer of control he once wore so easily had cracked. Samantha's reckoning came soon after. She arrived at the office to find her colleagues avoiding her gaze, their whispers following her down the hallway like an unwanted shadow. Her assistant handed her a sealed envelope from HR, her expression unreadable. Samantha opened it with trembling hands, reading the words she had feared most: mandatory leave of absence pending investigation. Her heart raced as she slumped into her chair. She picked up her phone, desperate to call Eric, to plead with him to undo the damage. But she stopped herself, knowing it was futile. The man she had betrayed was no longer the man she could manipulate with soft words and empty promises. Her day spiraled further when her team, once friendly and collaborative, began to treat her with icy professionalism. Samantha had built her career on the respect of her peers, but now all she saw in their eyes was judgment. The weight of her choices bore down on her, and for the first time she felt the full gravity of what she had done. Outside the office, the fallout extended to their personal lives. Friends who once admired Samantha and Richard began distancing themselves, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. Social media exploded with whispers of the affair, fueled by anonymous tips and leaked information. The polished image both had worked so hard to cultivate was now irreparably tarnished. Samantha returned home that evening to find the locks changed and a suitcase waiting for her on the porch. Eric had been true to his word. She would hear from his lawyer in the morning. Her attempts to contact him were met with silence. She was alone now, the life she had taken for granted reduced to fragments. Richard's situation was no better. His wife, upon hearing of the affair, left their home and took their children with her. She didn't wait for explanations or apologies. She had seen enough. Richard's house, once filled with laughter and warmth, now echoed with emptiness. His fall from grace extended beyond the professional and personal. Investors who had previously trusted him with multi-million-dollar deals began pulling out, unwilling to stake their reputations on someone whose character was now in question. Even his closest allies within the company began to distance themselves, unwilling to risk being dragged down with him. Meanwhile, Eric watched the fallout from a distance. He had no desire to revel in their misery, but he did feel a sense of vindication. Samantha and Richard had underestimated him, assuming their deceit would go unnoticed or unpunished. Now they were learning the cost of betrayal. In the weeks that followed, Eric focused on rebuilding his life. He met with his lawyer to finalize the divorce, ensuring that Samantha's access to his assets was limited. The process was painful but necessary, each signature a step toward reclaiming his independence. His support network of friends and family rallied around him, offering comfort and encouragement. One evening, his best friend, Matt, handed him a beer and said, "You did the right thing, man. It's tough now, but you've got your integrity intact. That's something no one can take from you." For Eric, moving on wasn't about forgetting, it was about finding a way to heal. He threw himself into his work, rediscovering the passion that had once defined him. He started going to the gym again, taking long runs to clear his mind. Slowly, he began to feel like himself again, unburdened by the lies that had weighed him down for so long. Samantha and Richard's lives, however, continued to unravel. The company terminated Richard's contract after the investigation confirmed his misconduct, and Samantha's reputation in the industry was so damaged that finding another job proved nearly impossible. They had burned the bridges they had crossed together, and now they were left to face the ashes. As the months passed, Eric found himself standing on firmer ground. The pain of betrayal lingered, but it no longer defined him. He had learned that betrayal, while devastating, didn't have to destroy. It could also teach, transform, and pave the way for something stronger. Eric walked into his future not as a victim but as a survivor, wiser, freer, and ready to rebuild. The fallout was behind him, and ahead lay the life he deserved. Eric stood on the balcony of his new apartment, the city lights twinkling below like scattered jewels. The air was crisp, carrying with it the scent of possibility. It had been 6 months since that night at Samantha's office, and though the journey to this moment had been grueling, it had also been transformative. The divorce had gone through quietly but decisively. Samantha had tried to negotiate, offering apologies and explanations, but Eric remained firm. His lawyer ensured the settlement was fair, but not overly generous. Samantha's betrayal left little room for sympathy. For Eric, the process was more than just a legal dissolution. It was the closing of a chapter that no longer held meaning. He had kept the house initially, unsure if he could bear to leave the memories it held. But as time passed, he realized the walls were too steeped in betrayal to offer comfort. Selling it had been liberating. The new apartment, smaller but modern and bright, felt like a blank slate, of space where he could redefine himself without the shadow of his past. Professionally, Eric found unexpected renewal. What had once been a job he loved had started to feel like a grind during the last few years of his marriage. But now, without the weight of Samantha's lies pulling him down, he rediscovered his passion. He began taking on challenging projects and volunteered for leadership roles that allowed him to mentor younger colleagues. In doing so, he not only rebuilt his career but also rebuilt his confidence. His co-workers noticed the change. One of them, Amanda, a sharp and driven project manager, commented one day during a team meeting, "You seem different lately, Eric. Happier, more alive." He smiled, appreciating the observation. She was right, he did feel alive. Outside of work, Eric leaned into friendships that had languished during his marriage. His best friend Matt became a fixture in his life again, pulling Eric out for beers, trivia nights, and hikes. They even took a weekend trip to the mountains, something they hadn't done in years. On the last night, sitting by a crackling fire, Matt clinked his beer bottle against Eric's and said, "Here's to starting over. You're doing it better than most people I've seen." Eric raised his bottle with a nod. Here's to figuring it out, one step at a time. Yet not every step was smooth. There were moments when Eric would catch a glimpse of a photo on social media, Samantha, at a party, her smile wide, but her eyes tired, and feel a pang of something he couldn't name. It wasn't regret. Exactly. It was the ache of a life that had been, a shadow of the love they'd once shared. But those moments were fleeting, and Eric reminded himself that the person Samantha had become wasn't the one he had fallen in love with. Richard, meanwhile, had disappeared from the corporate world. Rumors of his dismissal and the HR scandal had spread quickly, and no reputable firm wanted to risk hiring him. Eric heard from mutual acquaintances that Richard's marriage had ended and he had relocated to a small town to start over. The knowledge brought Eric no joy. His focus was no longer on them, but on himself. One unexpected source of healing came through therapy. Initially hesitant, Eric had booked a session on a friend's recommendation. What began as a way to process his anger and hurt evolved into a journey of self-discovery. His therapist, a warm and intuitive woman named Karen, helped him unpack not just the betrayal but also the patterns that had shaped his life long before Samantha. Forgiveness isn't for them, Karen had said during one session. It's for you. It's about releasing the hold they have on you, so you can move forward unburdened. The words stayed with him. Forgiveness didn't mean condoning what had happened, but it did mean letting go of the bitterness that could so easily poison his future. Gradually, Eric began to explore the idea of dating again. He wasn't in a rush, but he found himself enjoying casual coffee dates and conversations with women who intrigued him. There was no pressure, no expectation, just the simple joy of connection. It was on one such outing that he met Rachel, an architect with a sharp wit and a love for jazz. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, and by the end of the night, Eric felt something he hadn't in a long time: hope. One evening, as Eric sat in his living room, listening to a playlist of soft piano jazz, he reflected on how far he had come. His old life had been built on a foundation of trust that had crumbled, but his new life was stronger, steadier, and entirely his own. He thought about the man he had been before Samantha's betrayal: confident, trusting, perhaps a little naive. That man was gone, but Eric didn't mourn him. In his place was someone wiser, someone who had faced pain and emerged more resilient. As the music swelled, Eric stood and walked to the balcony. The city stretched out before him, alive and vibrant, just as he now felt. For the first time in a long while, the future didn't feel like something to fear. It felt like something to embrace. Eric smiled to himself, breathing deeply. He was ready for whatever came next.